On today's ZJ Project Update video, we'll be tackling some odds and ends on our Jeep as we prepare for our upcoming summer trip. This isn't going to be a huge install or big project, but instead we'll be doing some smaller projects that have been needing some attention for a while. Back in 2014, I purchased my first Jeep ever, which is this, a 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo. With the big 5.2 liter V8 engine and low miles, this completely stock ZJ was full of potential. Since then, well, we've done a few upgrades and modifications. Past projects include a 3.5-inch lift, transfer case swap, custom roof rack, lights, skid plates, and so much more. We've transformed this stock ZJ into a capable off-road rig and reliable daily driver that's taken us all across Arizona. Today, we continue the project. Our plan for today is to relocate our rear backup lights, install a new steering stabilizer, test our new air up and air down setup, and finally clean the Jeep and load up the rooftop tent. The first thing we will be doing is relocating and installing our backup and ambient camp lighting underneath the rear bumper. These small LEDs were previously installed on our roof rack for a while. When we reworked our roof rack to fit our new rooftop tent, which was about 7 to 8 months ago, we took these off the top in order to clear a spot for the tent. And in the time since then, we haven't yet remounted them. We didn't want to put them back on the roof because we wanted to keep it low profile. This was a pretty simple fix though. We backed the Jeep into the garage and got to work. We drilled some holes in the frame between the gas tank skid plate and rear bumper. We would be using some spacers to drop the lights down to the right height. With some new bolts and a little bit of measuring, the lights were soon in the right spot. Luckily, this new location wouldn't rob any ground clearance since the gas tank skid sits just a little bit lower than the lights themselves. The brackets were soon in place and we bolted them up before securing the lights. With the lights now in their proper place, the next phase was to work on the wiring. Luckily, we had left all of the existing wires in place underneath the headliner in the back of the Jeep. All we needed to do was get to them and extend them a bit further to reach underneath the bumper. Of course, we had to remove some paneling and the right taillight in order to tuck the wires in place. This was a bit tricky, but with the help of a clothes hanger and some needle nose pliers, the wires were soon lengthened and ready to connect to the lights. We reinstalled the taillight and hooked everything up. A quick test was in order to make sure that they worked before tucking the rest of the wires. Our custom switch panel, which is located up in front of the Jeep on the overhead console, was still hooked up and made this install a lot easier than the first time we installed these lights a few years back. The other two switches, at least at this point, remain unused, but do allow for future expansion on later projects. While this was a relatively simple project, it is one of those things that is surprisingly useful when out on the trail, or while out camping after dark. The lights looked good in their new position, and because they were closer to the ground, it seemed like they would actually end up providing more light coverage than before. Next on the agenda was to turn to the front of the Jeep. Over the last several months, my Jeep has developed a very slight wobble when out driving. It isn't full-on death wobble, But with trips coming up quickly as part of our summer travels, we ordered a new stabilizer to throw on to at least temporarily mask any potential issues, at least for the next 1 or 2 months. This install was also very easy. We popped off the older stabilizer, which was now about 2 years old. The stabilizer was dirty, but didn't have any obvious signs of damage or failure like the last time we replaced it. We proceeded to bolt on the new stabilizer in place since we already had it. This 2-bolt project went very quick. Now I know some people are already writing comments about how a stabilizer isn't the cause or the solution to death wobble. And that is absolutely right. Interestingly enough, following our summer trips, we'll actually come back to this issue and address full-on death wobble, as this issue will pop back up. But more on that in a couple months. With the more mechanical parts of this video now complete, the next quick thing I wanted to do was a full air up and air down to make sure all of my new components were working properly. With the installation of our new dual battery box, we not only added a second battery, but we also hardwired our compressor in the back of the Jeep. As we hadn't been out on a trip yet with this new setup, I wanted to make sure everything was going to work. To air down, I have Stawn tire deflators, which I have already used a couple of times. These are preset and adjustable deflators that allow you to basically set it and forget it. They automatically turn off at the preset pressure, which for us was around 15 psi. Those of course worked without a flaw. Next up was airing up. In order to reach all 4 tires, I ended up having to get a second replacement hose online. The hose that came with my Smittybilt compressor originally was just a few feet too short. With the 2 hoses connected, I was able to reach all of them easily. With everything hooked up, I quickly ran all of the tires back up to normal pressure. The compressor worked perfectly as well, and I now didn't need to leave the Jeep idling for this 5 to 10 minute process since everything was powered directly off the second battery. The compressor also did not get too hot since it was in this more isolated cubby. That was another thing I was concerned about. I gave the Jeep a quick vacuum and tidy up to get everything nice and clean right before it got all dirty again. With all of that other stuff done, it was now time for the last step, which was to load up the rooftop tent. This is actually a quick process that takes around 5 minutes, so I figured I would explain this and kind of show it since I do have the tent on and off a lot. And that is because I daily drive my Jeep and I don't camp every other day, so I keep my rooftop tent off the Jeep and parked out of the way in the garage. Keeping the tent on a 4-wheel furniture cart allows us to easily move the tent around and position the tent exactly where we need it for loading. All of the tools and mounting brackets are also kept right next to where the tent is stored. Next, we place 2 small strips of plywood into position on the roof rack. These have a small step on one end to prevent them from sliding off. These allow us to place the tent rails on top of the wood and then slide the tent into place. Without these, the design of our roof rack would make it pretty difficult because we would have to lift the tent while sliding it over the rails in the middle. After rolling the tent into place next to the Jeep, we carefully lifted it up on top. With the tent now on the roof, the plywood strips were now slid off. Finally, the mounting brackets were slid into the tent rails on all 4 corners. We leave one of the 2 bolts unloosened to make this process easier. Then, it's just a matter of putting on the nuts and getting everything tightened up. After this, the tent is now road and off-road worthy. With all of these small projects and prep work done, the Jeep was now ready for our summer travels. Like mentioned earlier, we will come back to the steering stabilizer in a later video, but Be sure to stay tuned later this month and the whole month of June for our annual summer trip series, which is nearly ready to launch. While this wasn't a full-on modification video, like most of our other ZJ videos, I wanted to get you guys caught up to speed on the way the Jeep sits right now. As always, thank you for watching this one, and we'll see you on the next adventure.